This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek, and we're talking this afternoon with Ashley Gjøvik. She is a was a manager at Apple and began a long struggle to protect her health and the health of other workers at the facilities in Silicon Valley and Sunnyvale where she was working. And she recently, on the 7th, filed a RICO lawsuit against Apple around the many issues that affected her and how she was treated and other workers have been treated. So welcome to the show, Ashley.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve.
So Ashley, this is the anniversary of your firing.
It
And
is 2 years.
and 2 years ago, they decided that rather than deal with the issues you had raised, they wanted to get rid of you and silence you and make these issues go away. It seems like it hasn't worked out that way.
It hasn't, and the termination, they tried with a bang too. So on September 9th, 2021, I woke up in the morning and I was still an active Apple employee. I was suspended. I was removed from the workplace interactions, all the work. They wouldn't let me come back. They said it was voluntary, but wouldn't let me come back and kept claiming they were like investigating my concerns, but they even admitted they were secretly investigating me. And I had been filing a bunch of complaints. So on that day, I had open NLRB investigation. Even I was already talking to them. The next day I had an affidavit. I went through EEOC. I've been going through California Department of Labor, US Department of Labor. They knew this. They knew that I had reported a bunch of misconduct that they had done, and I was talking to the government about it. And out of nowhere, I get an email with no subject line from a workplace violence and threat assessment interrogator demanding to get on the phone with me within the hour and won't tell me why. So I said, happy to, like 2 minutes later, happy to help, but would really prefer, as I've been saying, to keep this in writing. So there's a paper trail of what's discussed, especially since I have an NLRB affidavit tomorrow. And like he responds, because you refuse to cooperate, we're suspending all your account access. And I said something to, like, I complained of witness intimidation. I think it was before he sent that. And I was like, this feels like witness intimidation the day before my federal affidavit. And he's like, all your accounts are suspended. And then I get an email like 2 hours later from my vice president saying I'm fired. They won't tell me why. It's a vague accusation that I violated company policies and wouldn't cooperate. And there we are 2 years ago.
And basically, you had become a whistleblower because you discovered, to your chagrin, that in fact that your office site was on a Superfund site and it was leaking toxics. And also, you had an apartment where you were getting sick as well. And you tried to get them to do the right thing to clean it up. And it seemed that they were really not interested in cleaning it up. And you had to fight on your own, really, to get EPA and these other agencies to address the issue of protecting yourself and protecting the other people who worked at the facility.
That's all true. But like beyond that, and I had a feeling at the time, and I'm glad that I communicated it at the time and trusted my gut, but it felt like an extensive cover up and conspiracy. The stuff they were doing was so peculiar. It wasn't just like, oh, we are just going to be negligent at the building because we're lazy. It was like retaliating against people, trying to silence everyone, stealthily going to the building to repair stuff when we're not around. I was trying to take pictures of the safety issues, and then they removed me from the workplace permanently, like immediately after. They're doing that stuff. The factory that made me sick and others in 2020, they, I believe, knew by November 2020 that it was them, probably September 2020. So they must have known while they were retaliating against me about my office that they had also made me so sick I thought I was dying. And I didn't find out that that was them until this year. So they effectively covered that up. They also, for a year, covered up that my disclosures led to an EPA inspection that found safety issues before I was fired.
And it's supposed to be illegal for a company to fire somebody who makes a safety complaint or an EPA complaint. Apparently, they don't care what the law is. They want to retaliate. And I mean, I think this intimidation is not just against you. Other, I'm sure, Apple employees, if they raise questions, have been given the same treatment. I mean, you're not unique.
Pattern in practice. And that was something I raised before they removed me from all workplace interactions, as I'd gone into our company discussion tool and been like, hey, you guys, I raised some very valid concerns, and Apple's acting like a bunch of psychos. Has anyone else just been met with immediate retaliation for just raising a concern? And a bunch of people and a bunch of different organizations were like, yes, oh my God, me too. I wasn't. And we had this like coming together moment of realizing that they had done this to like alienate and isolate people. So they were quiet about their concerns and defensive too. So no one was sharing and showing the systemic issues. And then I was very quickly removed from the workplace indefinitely, told to stop talking to my coworkers. So like safety, EPA, all those things are supposed to be protected. But I had also raised issues about potentially criminal acts shortly before I was removed too. Apple was engaged in some funny business with potential COVID vaccine hoarding. One of my coworkers was like bragging what sounded like smuggling and violating sanctions against another company. This was all like that July before I was put out to pasture. So on September 3rd, I had also filed charges with the DOJ and FBI, and I'd made that public. And I haven't really talked about that as much because there's not really a retaliation, like a whistleblower retaliation cause of action for I called the FBI on you and then you fired me, which kind of enters the lawsuit that was filed this week.
And the other thing about Apple and a lot of other people in this country and around the world are concerned about not just Apple, but other countries with cell phones, is that they took your pictures, your text, and basically coerced you to allow them to take this material, which was personal. They didn't have your authorization, and it could be used as intimidation and threats against employees. And you're kind of in a situation where if you say no, you could be fired, or they would fire you. I mean, you brought that up to their attention as well. And what did they say about that?
I mean, that's plan of record for them. That was something, they do that on purpose. So one of the things I had started raising, it had bothered me since I first started Apple, is they have this culture of, at least for the R&D, the research and development employees, to only have work devices. So everything you do that's personal is also on your work devices. And they say that so you can like test the new software or new hardware, and you can file bugs and help them do their work. And in retrospect, that's them asking for unpaid labor during personal time, let alone the privacy issues. So there was this big pressure. It was even my reviews of how much I was living on and filing bugs and all this. And then they signed us up for these weird user studies and medical studies. And the basis, like for when you put the work stuff on the computer or the phone, you're giving them this full disk access to everything that's on that device. And I didn't really put that together at the time, although I kind of felt the weight of it, which means that anything you're doing whatsoever, they could see and copy and make backups of. And they have this huge global security team, aka worldwide loyalty team, that's known for spying on the employees. So surely they're harvesting all this information. And then I very specifically got irritated about an application. I was completely coerced, literally like tricked into a compound with an armed guard to do weird testing for them when I had to like quote unquote consent to this app. It was called the Face Gobbler, and it was taking pictures of faces anytime the phone camera thought it saw a face, which meant me, anyone around me, wherever I'm at, which meant like bathrooms and locker rooms or just like next to people in the grocery store. And they were using all that data. It was capturing biometrics too to develop Face ID. And like I tried, I didn't want to flag ever as like not being a team player because loyalty was so important. Like it was very cultish. But that was when I was constantly trying to sign out of that app. Like I was like, this app needs to, I don't want this. And I had protested it on August 30th when I was still suspended. And about a week later after I was fired, Apple hired a big law firm to send me a threatening email to make it sound like that's why they fired me, is I complained about that app spying on us. And so that's their supposed legitimate justification.
And there's another incident I know about. In fact, there's a film called Big Brother, and this is about Samsung workers in Korea who are trying to get legal information from a lawyer, a labor lawyer. They went to the lawyer, and then they went back to Samsung, and Samsung bosses repeated the exact wording that they had said to the lawyer.
Oh,
So they were actually spying on the workers who were trying to organize a union. And the Koreans made a film called Big Brother about the use of these cell phones to spy on their own workers who were trying to organize at Samsung, which is a virulently anti-union company, like Apple. And a number of charges of clauses in that have led you to file this RICO. It seems like, an incredible number of violations of the law. I mean, you look at that thing and just one after another. Why don't we go through some of the areas of violation of your rights and illegal action by Apple to basically try to destroy you? I mean, that they did.
Well, first I'll say too, so I had filed, I have the cases with NLRB and US Department of Labor, and I still don't have an outcome from them on the retaliation charges. And there's been a lot of funny business from those agencies, which you can go back and look at my prior interviews with Steve to get briefed on that. There's a lot of agency capture issues. So it felt reckless to me to not file a civil suit. So I would foreclose some of my options for civil actions if the government didn't actually fulfill its statutory obligations. So then I'm like, okay, if I'm filing a civil lawsuit, anyways, I want to make sure it encompasses everything. This might be my one shot to go after them for all this depraved stuff they've done and stuff I witnessed and all the stuff they're intimidating me to shut up about. So I pulled out my California Department of Labor case, and I've gone after them for those California statutes. I went after them with California. It's kind of like a hate crime, but it's also for labor activities, violence and threat statute, and then another one where violence and threats and intimidation to try to prevent people from exercising their civil rights in California, like filing charges, testifying, protesting privacy invasions, all of that kind of stuff. I pulled out my SOX whistleblower charge from US Department of Labor, so I'm going to do that civil now because I don't trust them at all. And Dodd-Frank, I can do civil too, because I had filed an SEC charge also on September 1st. So just about a week before I was fired, and Apple had known I did that. So that also, I mean, it was kind of wild that they thought that was a great idea to fire me with all that stuff open. So I had all that, but there was a lot of stuff I wanted to be able to bring in of like reporting on the FBI. I had complained to them that it appeared that they were involved in racketeering before they even suspended me. Like, I was like, what are you guys doing? You know, just such bizarre, crazy behavior and cover-ups and intimidating people to shut up about stuff that's just kind of mind-blowing. So I want to be able to call out that kind of stuff where I'm raising issues. I was talking to a district attorney's office actively about the apartment where I got sick when they did all this, and then learning it was Apple. So Apple knew I was talking to a district attorney about what Apple did to me, and I didn't know it was Apple yet. And then they're doing all this crap. So RICO was actually a very good vehicle for that. I wasn't sure if it would work for an employment case, but the way Apple fired me is very likely an indictable violation of 18 USC 1512 and 1513, which are intimidating and tampering with witnesses and retaliating against witnesses and informants. So, I mean, I literally complained about witness intimidation before he suspended all my accounts and they fired me. Like, this should be a really easy
So
case.
it sounds like a smoking gun.
Yeah, and then once I realized, so RICO normally it doesn't work for employment cases unless the way that you were fired or retaliated against by your employer is probably a criminal felony, which what Apple did probably is. You know, and it just has to be indictable. So you meet all the prima facie of what it would be, and it does very much so, you know. So once I realized that, you have to get these predicate acts, enough of these felonies and violations of federal law, they can show a pattern in practice and enterprise. And then I just went to town once I realized I was through the door, because I could pull in all the stuff I was reporting and complaining about that they retaliated against me for. And then I was also realizing, like, people I was talking to who are supposedly overseeing the policies I supposedly violated, and the stuff they said are like actively being charged with felonies as we speak. So I included Apple's chief compliance officer, Tom Smoyer, was indicted for criminal bribery recently, and he somehow got unindicted, and then the DA appealed, and he's now like recharged, so he's going to trial. He apparently bribed the local sheriff's office. So state criminal bribery is a predicate act. I included that. I went after the agencies who were doing we've talked about this in prior interviews, the stuff they were doing was felonious to me. Like, they were doing witness intimidation, they were doing obstruction. So I had a section on criminal extortion and talked about my first NLRB investigator and what US Department of Labor was trying to do to extort me on that audio recording. So I talk about some of that.
They were colluding with, they were sounding like they were colluding with Apple.
We'll find out in discovery. I mean, I wanted to avoid a civil case with Apple as much as I could. They're known to be litigious bullies, really difficult in court. They try to just make it really expensive and time consuming and obnoxious. So you just want to give up and nothing's ever decided on the merits, which is why I thought I'd go through the government instead. And that did not work. So now I'm here. I'm ready. I'm going to engage with them. But I'm realizing at this point, I've learned so much and gathered so much evidence already. I'm in a really good position to ask them to show their cards now. I have a lot of very targeted questions for them about what occurred and who was talking to who. And I look forward to them being legally obligated to share some of those documents with me. Because there was
Well, they're
a lot of
required
funny
to.
business.
I mean, if you are successful pursuing this, and I'm sure they would like to throw it out, you're going to be able to get these documents and exchanges, and they're basically criminal conspiracy to take away your rights and to violate the law.
I feel like I should be getting a salary from the DA's office at this point. I've been like doing my own investigation. But yeah, and you know, RICO, I didn't realize this, like a civil RICO case for a whistleblower like this, when I complained that all the stuff they were doing seemed criminal. I mean, it really is. And RICO is a vehicle for whistleblowers in my position to go after them for criminal acts. Usually that's a prosecutor or the A. So there's a lower standard. It just has to be indictable, and you show the pattern and show the racketeering. That gave me a really good vehicle also to bring in all the environmental crimes. So I had to leave my CERCLA retaliation case with U.S. Department of Labor to go keep doing obstruction of justice to me over there. And I only learned about Apple's factory too late to file charges for RCRA, Clean Air Act, a bunch of these other statutes. So, but Apple, the stuff they were doing at that factory is absolutely criminal. Like, and we'll find out. There was an inspection based on my complaints from the federal EPA, and we're awaiting the outcome of what they found when they visited, unexpected. It could be criminal. So we'll find out. But from what I've seen, I think it is. And I was able to bring a lot of what they did in through wire fraud and mail fraud, because they were filing fraudulent documents about their activities. And I had found through my research a few occasions where I could prove that they said one thing and they did another, you know, where it doesn't make sense. And I also found a tie into securities fraud, because they advertise to the consumers and their stockholders that they are very environmentally friendly. They're a very sustainable company. And in fact, they're so good, they've set standards that other companies need to follow. When in reality, they were venting, literally, they reported themselves 7.8 metric tons of volatile organic chemicals just straight out of that factory into our apartment windows in just 2020.
So they were harming a lot of people, not just you.
Thousands of people. And that's why I couldn't let this one go. I really had to figure out what was going on there, because I was so sick. If anyone else was as sick as I was, like, I couldn't let it go. So I'm so glad that I figured it out and got someone looking into it. And hopefully there's just at least additional oversight going on, but hopefully they stop. I would like to see that factory shut down. It should not be operating next to a bunch of apartments. They should do that.
And how do they justify it? Are they covered up? I mean, they have a factory next to an apartment building with people, and that people don't know why they're getting sick. It really,
and that's exactly why we have right to know. Right to know was established in the 80s, and the community notice, the SARA addition to CERCLA. We have these laws because there were factories that were creating all this pollution in the air and the water, and they weren't telling the community. The community has a right to know if they're being exposed to chemicals from these factories. And there's supposed to be things like with fence line communities, a conversation process. If someone wants to put something in that's going to have a lot of emissions next to residential, it shouldn't just be like stamped and approved quietly in the background. That's a problem. So there's a lot of issues there. I have some theories of how it even got approved that I included in the RICO claims. Like how I think they even got it going. But yeah, they filed it under code names too. It wasn't even under Apple. They called it Project Aria, and the local government went along with that for quite a while, which is just insane to me. So with RICO also, it allowed me to argue Apple's a defendant, but they're part of a criminal enterprise that involves a lot of these regulatory agencies, either just a couple of employees from them or departments themselves, that have been allowing Apple to avoid regulatory compliance obligations to an egregious extent. And then, you know, Apple's going out and saying that they're actually great and wonderful. And I argue what fills the difference, if anyone sees the difference of what they're actually doing versus what they claim to be doing, that's when all the witness intimidation and witness retaliation and obstruction of justice comes in.
And the government agencies, which we pay for, the taxpayer pay for, to do oversight in these companies, it seems that there's been a capture of them. Daryl Whitman, who was a former investigator lawyer for Whistleblower Protection Agency with OSHA, tried to defend whistleblowers or had merit determinations that people had been retaliated against because of making health and safety complaints. He was then retaliated and fired. They refused to do an investigation, of his agency. And he's still fighting them. There are other
But
federal.
we should tell him I personally indicted his agency for extortion. No, he was spot on. He was absolutely spot on with that agency. The corruption was just unbelievable. It's hard for me to fathom, because even escalating to the inspector general's office or the solicitor, there was zero response or help. When I escalated to the head of the whistleblower protection agency, he ratted me out to the person I was complaining about, like forward it. And then that's when the guy created the letter that he put a tracking number on that says he investigated himself and thinks he's great. And I just need to shut up and do what they say. It was mind blowing. Yeah.
I mean, this is these agencies, capture of these agencies, and the fact that they're going after the whistleblowers, yourself and many, many others who try to raise health and safety concerns, and yet there's no prosecution. Where's the Department of Justice? That's
also part of the concern, right? Okay, where's the sheriff's office? Taking bribes from Apple and under corruption investigation. They've paid donations to get the local police to do private work for them. The FBI published that article just a few years ago, the regional office in San Francisco, saying they love Apple because Apple trains their cops. The whole article is just the FBI fawning over Apple.
A PR press release for Apple.
It was just crazy. And so this RICO case is cathartic for me, because I had a lot of institutional betrayal that I was not getting responses from DAs and the DOJ and these agencies I would have hoped would kind of jumped on this. I also wanted someone to protect me. That was my first year of just spinning of why is no one here to protect me from this? This is cool. It was terrifying. So these California statutes, I didn't know about them prior until my research. The Bain Civil Rights Act and Ralph Civil Rights Act, they're actually in place for people like me, where you're facing threats of violence, you're facing extreme intimidation, for things like trying to exercise your civil rights, doing something that people will target you over. And you get, I think it's treble damages, which is the triple damages. You can get restraining orders, make them stop. There's a lot of remedy and relief there. It's put in place to try to prevent this violence that people face.
And part of the problem, and the reason there haven't been more of these kind of suits, is that they destroy workers.
Yeah, I could see how people
they intimidate them on
day one. They're just I'm not going to do this.
Yeah, I mean, and lawyers want to get a settlement. And they want you to be quiet, usually. Don't talk about your case.
Hush money, which is corruption. The more I think about the whole NDA setup, it's kind of like an extortion, actually, where you're I know all this stuff, but I'm going to keep quiet as long as you give me a bunch of money, and I won't tell the government or anyone else, but you got to pay me. We've really normalized that exchange, which is very problematic. And that's generally how the lawyers kind of engage on this sort of thing by default. So I immediately had disagreements with the lawyers, because I was okay, everything ends with a settlement. They're going to have to pay me eventually, but I want public record of what they did. I want some kind of public decision. I want them to have to write a letter. What is it, abdicating? We did do some terrible things. We're sorry. And lawyers are they're not going to do that. We're not going to fight for that. And so I was well, I am. That's crazy.
And this is not just an issue in your case. There's issues of workers' comp when you sue companies for injury, and then you have to go to a settlement and keep quiet about it. So workers can't talk about it. So you don't know that there's systemic health problems in an industry. I mean, it seems like the laws are set up to avoid liability for the companies and to cover up the serious health and safety standards. I mean, Silicon Valley, for the people who don't know, is a Superfund site of many sites. And so we're talking a large number of people.
Yeah. Santa Clara County has the most Superfund sites in the entire nation. Also the brownfields and other toxic cleanup sites. It's one of the most polluted areas in the entire country.
And that's not well known. And you also were able to write in the SF Bayview, and where they were fighting the corruption and the cover up of Hunters Point Shipyard, radioactive dump site, and Treasure Island, that workers have been, particularly Black community, has been sickened with, gotten cancer, got all kinds of ailments because of the highly toxic chemicals and radioactive material in that site. And the health department is not interested in San Francisco and even testing people. And it's a city facility.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a hearing. They asked them, the San Francisco Public Health Department, have you tested people at Hunters Point to find out if they're getting sick from the environment? No, we don't know who's doing that. We don't know who's doing that. I mean, this is San Francisco's responsibility. Nancy Pelosi, who's a congressperson, Kamala Harris, who was set up an environmental unit, justice unit in the district attorney's office in the city and county of San Francisco, but never investigated what was going on at Hunters Point when they were getting rid of whistleblowers at Hunters Point.
Nephew would make less money because her nephew is doing all the development at Hunters Point.
That's what it's out. It's about developers. Now, I mean, your case really shows the systemic corruption and shows it's not an isolated case. It's happened to many other people. Many other people have tried to file complaints. They've tried to grapple with this environmental crisis and retaliation, and also the many thousands, and we don't know how many people in Silicon Valley who've actually been sickened by this, who have damages against Apple. It sounds like you're not the only one.
I surely am not. And another benefit of going with the RICO charge for this is, in order to prove the enterprise and prove that there are schemes and it fits all the RICO criteria, you have an opportunity to give a nice little background of all the felonious activity in this, company, this entity's history, to try to show that this isn't a one-time thing. It's not a temporary thing. This is what they do. This is an ongoing activity, which let me talk about, quote, articles, press coverage, other cases, other employee lawsuits, showing that this is what they do. What they did with me was not new, other than I think I was exposing it in real time on Twitter, which I think I never regret. Like, that was actually, it put some sunlight on everything. They couldn't get to me to shut me up after I restarted. But yeah, I'm sure it happens to a lot of people.
Did they try to shut you up to say you wouldn't post on Twitter?
Well, I think that's what the intimidation was. And they were also attacking me with threatening emails and social media accounts. They had set up coworkers, incited coworkers to attack me and bully me. There was so much going on. And it occurred to me the entire time, like, okay, the outcome seems to be they want me to have some kind of nervous breakdown and just walk away and give up. And they were doing everything in their power to cause such a thing to occur. But unfortunately for them, their hostile work environment for the 6.5 years I was there prepared me to get through that, as I did deal with other crap while I worked there. It was absolutely miserable though. And I could see how most people would just drop it. I felt a responsibility, since my case became so public, that I wanted to see it through and show people you can see it through. I'd feel bad if I just walked away, but I also completely understand why most people would just walk away.
And you found out also that they had top government officials like Lisa Jackson, who was the EPA director, and she was hired by Apple. I mean, the interchange between Apple and the US government, whatever the administration, seems to be a problem, because you have government officials, top government officials in Apple, and colluding with the government and making sure that doing damage control for Apple is successful.
Quite literally, and that's part of my allegations in here that I have now, substantiated by the FOIA documents. I was able to extract from the white knuckle grip of that guy that was not giving me any FOIA docs for over a year, that showed that they were actively killing like newspaper articles, potentially about me in my office, by not telling anyone what was going on. They were hiding from me and anyone else that there was an inspection of my Apple office, that there were issues. Which was the only explanation I could find in March 2022. Apple's position statement to U.S. Department of Labor about why they fired me, what went on, had no mention whatsoever of an inspection or any type of issues. In fact, they said that pretty much the last thing that happened related to the office was July, and I was being completely unreasonable, which only would work for them if I never find out about the inspection and all the issues that were found. So they must have felt certain that the EPA had their back, that no one would tell me what actually happened. And then I have, articles from them kind of giving themselves updates about not telling me things and killing articles and all of that. It was very disturbing. So I'm glad I can call that out in this case to show, it wasn't just them internally doing all this crazy stuff to me. Their octopus tentacles go everywhere of all these agents. And it makes sense, I guess, right? They have a huge presence in Northern California, so they're going to capture all of those regional offices to ensure that any kind of complaints never see the light of day.
And Governor Newsom, his Department of Toxic Pesticides, the OSHA, California OSHA, California runs its own OSHA program. They know about your complaints. They know about the health and safety issues. What have they done?
So California arguably doesn't have jurisdiction on like the office because it's a federal Superfund site. I did have conversations with the head of the regional office where I explained what was going on with the HVAC situation, where Apple went on the roof and like hacksawed the poison vents really low and then stuck the HVAC intake on top of the poison vents. So we were apparently had a nice ambiance of carcinogens for over 5 years, 6 years. And we had a big talk about the statutory authorization for them to like, you know, say we're going to look at it because it's HVAC, but it's HVAC filled with Superfund fumes. So they did talk to me about that, and they decided that unless I got a coworker to complain and maybe ask for someone to wear like a testing badge or something, there's not much they could do. The plant, that factory with all the emissions, was only overseen by the city it was in. There was no state oversight. There was no county oversight. It was the city fire department for a semiconductor manufacturing plant, which is just, it's bonkers if you know anything about that type of production and manufacturing. It's incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly complicated. Unless you're specially trained as a regulator, you don't even know what to look for. You don't even understand what you're seeing when you go in. You need specialty people to go in and evaluate. So it explains, I think, how they got away with that for so long. It was just
I mean, it sounds comparable to what happened during the pandemic, and the workers at Tesla, the factory workers, were not getting proper PPE. And instead of OSHA going in there, they had the police department, the Fremont Police Department, go to the plant to do the testing. So Gavin Newsom's pal, Elon Musk, wouldn't be required to follow the law.
I was about to say, Elon like hires all these ex-police like investigators, security guard people too. Like he's probably captured his local police. I'd be surprised if he hasn't. So it's like the employees are complaining about safety issues, and Elon brings in like weaponized police officers to be like, I think
they know how to protect workers from their health and safety. I mean, you need industrial, you need professionally trained people to protect from the pandemic, and yet he was allowed to get away with it. In fact, he said, arrest me. There was a shelter in place order, and he said, arrest me. And, he was given a pass. So small businesses closed down. He was able to keep his factory going, and it became a vector for COVID.
I can see the attitudes, why they have these attitudes. They probably do get away with this most of the time. Again, like I was in a position where I filed so many complaints that were so legitimate and were showing real issues, and they were acting so crazy that like I'm able to persevere a bit. But they captured the agencies. Like I've given up on getting any kind of due process at any of the agencies I filed the charges at. NLRB was finally moving along, and then Apple hired an army of Morgan Lewis attorneys, including a prior NLRB board member, which is like the Supreme Court of the NLRB. He was on that like Supreme Court, so he knows everyone. And then like 4 others of them were ex-NLRB staff as well, not executives, but like staff. And ever since they joined, I've like not heard anything other than them threatening to like undo a decision I had prior, which I had to fight really hard. So I'm like, this is just crazy. So any employee that's filing charges, I was originally met with some of them telling me not to file charges, or maybe I should just withdraw them. And I was like, that's not what you're supposed to say. What are you doing? So I wonder how many people they talk the employees out of even filing them at all. And then they spend a lot of time threatening me to try to get me to withdraw. I'm like, I'm not withdrawing, because if you withdraw, you can't appeal too.
I see. So
I was like, if you're going to do the corruption, you need to do it on the record, and I'm going to appeal it. And then they're like, oh no, she figured this out. She knows how this works now. So I can see a lot of them like, and I've heard them doing this to employees over the last couple of years, will say like, oh, we're not going to fight in your favor for reasons, stuff that doesn't make any sense. It's going to become public record though that you lost unless you withdraw right now. And a lot of people do. I already kind of just blew my whole career up. So I'm kind of like, what do I have to lose at this point? Let's keep going. But most people, like, you want to save some face. You don't want to make things worse than they already are. So that's very effective. And then when cases are going, like mine, once it's gone this long, you can easily end up closing something because there was an administration change or a policy change or some kind of excuse of why something was no longer, ripe to actually act on. So I'm expecting they might try to do that just to disappear it. So, I was getting very depressed about that. Once I realized my statute of limitations was coming up, it forced me to really consider doing the one thing I really did not want to do, and that was sue Apple in a federal court. But that's what I'm doing now, and I feel good I'm doing that because I suspect they were counting on me not doing that, knowing that that is a nightmare, and I'd be representing myself against our army of lawyers who are notoriously really, really difficult in court, even with law firms on the other side, let alone just, hi, I'm Ashley,
Hi, I'm Ashley.
I know. So, but I'm I can actually control this somewhat comparative to the government agencies where it's just a black box. I have no idea what they're doing. I have no idea where stuff is. I don't feel like I can advocate for myself or hold anyone accountable, but I have a much better chance with this. And I look forward to them having to argue their way out of any of this. I have evidence for just about everything. There's a lot of funny business that I suspect in discovery. We're going to reveal a bunch of additional issues. And I found a creative way to bring in the chemical exposure. One of the predicate acts is related to chemical weapons, and the case law, it's pretty actually kind of vague about what a chemical weapon is in that sense. And there's enough case law supporting that just releasing toxic lethal gases around a neighborhood will satisfy an actual conviction, a criminal conviction. And I don't have to prove that. I just have to prove indictable. And so Apple definitely sent a lot of phosphine gas around our neighborhood. Is recorded that they did that in Sea Lane. I also have medical evidence that it appears they at least one night arsine gas attacked me, which is the most deadly gas there is. And then they had a bunch of chlorine gas that they apparently weren't reporting that they had, and regulators dinged them on it. If you need to tell us when you have chlorine gas. All three of those are actually weapons of mass effect, according to the Department of Homeland Security. They are chemical weapons. So if I can prove this, that means Apple actually has to pay me for all my chattel property they destroyed in my apartment when they turned all my clothes went weird colors and metals were reacting in weird ways. So that would actually be cathartic if they have to give me treble damages for my chattel property damage.
And it's not just the federal government, state government. Rob Bonta, the Attorney General, where is he? I mean, with the evidence that you're going to be presenting, it would seem that the state of California should be defending you and other whistleblowers and the residents of that, who live next to that factory, that they haven't really properly supervised. I mean, isn't California supposed to supervise industrial factories like a silicon factory?
Delegate to the city. So I was trying to understand that. So the federal government delegates to the California on this stuff. And apparently the California government can delegate to cities and counties, but if they mess up, then they lose that privilege. And that's apparently happened with several cities around California when they went crazy. There's a few names they told me. So Santa Clara could become one of those where they're no longer allowed to do it themselves. I suspect it would go to the county, which it should have been with already. Generally, Santa Clara County is overseen by the Santa Clara Department of Environmental Health, which is a county level that has more special training. It is better equipped to deal with this sort of stuff. But Santa Clara and Sunnyvale opted out of county oversight. Mind you, these are the two cities where these, poison factories that I was in, so I hopefully getting more oversight. And because my California Department of Labor cases never actually even started being investigated, arguably they didn't have any obligation to do anything. I mean, one would think that they would jump in, but the federal government was actively investigating and seeing all of this stuff. They should have done something, and they just intimidated me more.
So they were actually colluding with Apple to shut you down.
That's what my RICO lawsuit says.
And I mean, the oversight, and it's not just in the electronics industry, biotech industry, the fact that they don't have proper health and safety in biotech laboratories for workers, and they self-regulate. In fact, OSHA has admitted, former Michael David, that they don't even have a staff to know what's going on with these biotech laboratories. And this is when we have leaks, biotech leaks, hazards.
And they claim it's confidential. They don't want anyone poking around because it's
proprietary information. It seems like that's a big part of intimidation that they use of Apple employees. This is proprietary. You have to keep quiet. You can't say anything. Top secret.
Actually found a good comparison looking back in the 80s. Lockheed Martin had this group called the Skunk Works that was working on all the like very new special projects for DoD, and they had their own separate facility, and they're not supposed to talk about them working there or what they're working on, and it's super confidential. And when you're in there, the windows are all tinted and you can't see anything and you can't call out. And there was a lawsuit from employees who were exposed to chemicals, and they actually blamed that confidentiality as one of the factors of why they got so sick and had so much exposure, because there weren't contractors and vendors able to come in. There wasn't oversight from the companies related to those chemicals who could try to help intervene, share information, answer training questions. It was just up to Lockheed, who was not apparently doing what they should have, which resulted in a lot of harm to human health. So we actually have like legal precedent that these very secret companies or programs, you can exasperate these kind of chemical exposure issues by having the lack of communication and the lack of transparency.
And you discovered that there were some military contractors involved with Apple, and that they're part of the problem with Apple that you found out.
They are. So, and like, I'm in a weird spot right now where just comparing to Apple's behavior, I've been more forgiving of Northrop Grumman at this point. I'm like, Apple's more of like a war machine than you are, Northrop, from what I've seen. But they definitely, I think, did help Apple cover stuff up. So I believe that they discovered the HVAC issue probably in November 2020. That was the first time they did a rooftop inspection, and they took photos and they had notes. But they failed to mention that when they installed the toxic air vents, they were 3 feet tall. And when they showed up to look at it, they were like less than 1 foot tall. And the HVAC was on top. And so when I think it was like April 2022, they finally sent a new updated memo that was like, Apple had reckless disregard for the functioning of the subflat depressurization system, and we had no idea this was. So I'm fairly certain they knew by November 2020, but they probably, were in cahoots with Apple to keep it quiet. The EPA, because of my complaints and questions, requested that report. It was requested in 2019 that they start doing this, and said, hey, where's that report? It was due a while ago. And they send it. And that's around the time that Apple went completely psycho on me. So Apple must have known that the EPA is about to find out what they did with the HVAC and everything's going to blow up more. We really need Ashley to go away. This is also around the time when they had another phosphine leak at that factory, and they apparently vented the gases just into the exterior air, and apparently never notified the residents that this lethal gas was in their air. And then when I was looking at their manifest, they also around that time had sent out a bunch of vacuum filters with glass shards, like 60 pounds, I think, which sounds like an explosion. Phosphine causes explosions. So I assume like all this stuff is happening, and that's why Apple's like, she needs to go. And I'm like, I'm not. What are you doing? Something's going on here. But it took Northrop some time to come around. One would think that an industry that heavily regulated would have known better. But I assume they were conspiring with Apple.
And they're on the board.
Sugar. So I, again, like I had a feeling while all of this was going down, and I knew I could have sounded like crazy if I was completely off base, but I was like, something's up. And I'm trying to figure out like, why are they acting like this? And one of my guesses, and I started accusing them. I'm like, is this Ronald Sugar? So this guy, Ronald Sugar, is on Apple's board, and he is the chair of the Finance and Audit Committee. He's also the very longtime CEO of Northrop Grumman, and before that, TRW. So he was actually an executive at TRW when they were in my office, spilling all the crap in the backfield when it turned into a Superfund site, all of that. So he must be very familiar with that office. And at that point, that's kind of all I knew. But I was like, so how did Apple become a tenant? Why did Apple think it was a great idea to rent here? Who approved this in the first place? Like, is he? And then they got real upset when I started saying his name even. So yeah, again, I'll be interested during discovery of like what comes out about this.
You'll have a wide opportunity, and the officials in Sunnyvale, the officials in Santa Clara County, you would think that they would have an emergency session to look at what happened, because their residents, the people in their communities, were the ones that were being poisoned.
I suspect they've known for some time. So when I figured it out, I sent an email to the Santa Clara City Mayor, Lori. She and I had some meetings back in 2021 about everything that was going on when we thought it was Irvine Company. And I was like, oh, it was Apple, it was this factory. They never responded. And I had started requesting more public records requests related to the office. One of the most recent batches was that 2019 incident report. The 2021 incident report that shows that they vented it all into like the exterior air. And there's a lot more apparently they haven't released yet. They've pushed it out, I think, like 8 weeks now. They won't give it to me. And they keep saying that like multiple agencies are interested in these records. We can't release them yet. And like, I was like tweeting about it. I'm like, if those are like emails with Mayor Gilmore saying, oh, this is clearly what made Ashley sick, let's not tell anyone, especially her, like I will spontaneously combust. Like, I'm like, oh, I should probably public records request myself to that government to see who's talking about me, but I think I might die.
Yeah, no, it's horrendous. It's horrendous, you know, what they've done, and the fact that the politicians have gone along with it because they don't want to take on Apple, and that's and they're bought by
money.
Apple.
They're captured, right? It's not like it's completely malicious. Like they're just like, it'll be fun to side with this company for fun. They want Apple's tax money, Apple renting their buildings, Apple having people in the city, bringing in restaurants, commercial. It's all set up that they're basically company towns.
And what can people do? I mean, I think workers will benefit if you're successful in your fight. I mean, workers are trying to organize at Apple stores. IAM and CWA are trying to organize. I mean, I think a lot of workers would like to speak out, but they're frankly intimidated. They're terrorized, and the laws protect the companies. And that's what you really discovered. You're miraculously, amazingly have survived a campaign to destroy you by Apple. And
I'm tenacious. There's something wrong with me that I've lasted through this though. Like my goal from the beginning, and I said this even in interviews back in like September 2021, is like, I want to create and crystallize the law we supposedly have that should protect us in these situations that clearly is not being enforced or is understood. And looking around, a lot of it, there's not clear legal precedent, probably because so many employees take the hush money and never actually have something to court. To get the precedent, you need a legal decision, which means going through the trial, having the judge issue the decision. If there's an appeal, going through the appellate process, then it's binding on multiple courts. That very rarely happens. I want to create new law. And so this federal case also is encouraging to me that if I get a decision in this federal district court, it's at least persuasive for other courts to look to model how they would decide on similar issues, which is very exciting to me because my case is so strong. There's so much evidence and they broke so many laws that it's ripe to have some new precedent grow out of it that is pro-worker, pro-labor, pro-public health, and anti all the stuff Apple's doing.
Well, I think your struggle is a struggle that we all have to support, and it's for all working people here and around the world. And I think the unions, the labor movement has to back you and has to really defend basic human rights. It's not just worker, it's human rights, to not be poisoned. I mean, you think that that's in the United States today, the right not to be poisoned. That's a fight.
That was a term I used in emails with Apple, even prior to suspension, was like, all I'm asking is to not be poisoned. Can you just not poison me? And I'm like, no. It's crazy. It is so crazy.
It is crazy.
I hope it helps encourage other people. I hope we can build some precedent out of it. I'd love to work with the other people who are interested in this. I do think it's very applicable, especially now with all the onshoring with the CHIPS Act and other acts where they're trying to bring manufacturing back in the United States. We're seeing a lot of the problems we've seen for decades and decades and decades. I think we've forgotten a little bit because we did offshore so much, but manufacturing is dirty and dangerous, and without proper labor code and health and safety oversight, people die at work.
And there are less than 200 OSHA inspectors in California.
Less
than 200 for 18 million workers, less than 200 OSHA inspectors. And Larry Rose, who was the head of the medical unit of Cal OSHA, was trying to protect the workers at IBM in South San Jose. And they were poisoning the groundwater, and they were getting cancer. There was a cancer epidemic. People died. And he was told by OSHA, they signed a voluntary agreement with IBM to be a good citizen, to be a good company, and therefore they couldn't get the records released.
So
So
something
it's
I
small.
could recommend to everyone is something I did by default because I'm just that person. When someone says something crazy, is I'm like, I'd like to talk to your manager and or file a formal complaint about whatever that is. And I think that's been effective in getting me some traction. I don't think they like it when you document them saying crap like that, where they're like, don't write that down. We said that. Like everyone, when you hear stuff like that from agencies, if you are in a position to like document it, complain to them, so there's a paper trail about it. I think if they get enough pressure from the community, they have to stop saying crap like that.
Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Ashley Gjøvik. She has just filed a historic RICO suit about criminal activity of the Apple Corporation, and has been in really a war where they've been trying to destroy her. And despite that, she's taken it forward and she's after them. So thanks for joining us on WorkWeek, Ashley.
Thanks, Dave.